تفضل.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا إنا خلقنا الإنسان من نطفة أمشاج نبتليه فجعلناه سميعا بصيرا إنا هديناه السبيل إما شاكرا وإما كفورا إنا أعتدنا للكافرين سلاسلا وأغلالا وسعيرا إن الأبرار يشربون من كأس كان مزاجها كافورا عينا يشرب بها عباد الله يفجرونها تفجيرا يوفون بالنذر ويخافون يوما كان شره مستطيرا ويطعمون الطعام على حبه مسكينا ويتيما وأسيرا إنما نطعمكم لوجه الله لا نريد منكم جزاء ولا شكورا إنا نخاف من ربنا يوما عبوسا قمطريرا فوقاهم الله شر ذلك اليوم ولقاهم نضرة وسرورا. صدق الله العلي العظيم. وإلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات نهدي للجميع ثواب سورة الفاتحة مع الصلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أحسنتم، طيب الله أنفاسكم. بسم الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم، والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين، واللعنة الدائمة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Holy Quran what he says is the truth. And we're still with the verses of وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا, and the self and he who created it. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا, and he gave it its ability to be corrupt and to be pious. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, successful is the one who purifies it. وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا, and a failure is the one who does not. صدق الله العلي العظيم. آمنا بالله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته جميعا.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Inshallah, we will start today with lesson number 12, bi'awnihi ta'ala. And in this lesson, we will cover the right of the stomach and the right of the privates. And that will conclude haqq al-nafs. After that, we'll move on to haqq al-arham, inshallah. So let's see what we will cover today, inshallah. So we'll look at the right of the stomach, and then we'll summarize the action items that the Imam has given us for that specific body part, and then we'll talk about the right of the privates, and we'll summarize the action items that the Imam gave us in terms of the privates. So starting off with the right of the stomach, the Imam Salamullahi alayhi, he says, وَأَمَّا حَقُّ بَطْنِكَ, as for the right of your stomach, فَأَنْ لَا تَجْعَلْهُ وِعَاءً لِقَلِيلٍ مِنَ الْحَرَامِ وَلَا لِكَثِيرٍ. He says, for it is that you should not make it a container for haram, neither little of it nor a great deal of it. So whether small or large amounts of food or drink that are haram should not enter our belly. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Holy Quran in the chapter of An-Nisa, chapter 4 verse 10, he says, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ أَمْوَالَ الْيَتَامَى ظُلْمًا. Surely those who eat from the wealth of or spend from the wealth of the orphans, they do so out of oppression. إِنَّمَا يَأْكُلُونَ فِي بُطُونِهِمْ نَارًا. Surely, because the money that they are using is owned by the orphans, it is not theirs, then really what they are eating is not food. Really, what they are eating is fire in their bellies. وَسَيُصْلَوْنَ سَعِيرًا. And surely, on the day of judgment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will place them in a burning fire. So, the Imam, salamullahi alayhi, then, just to recap real quick, he says, لا تجعله فإن لا تجعله وعاء لقليل من الحرام ولا كثير. So don't make it a container that contains whether small amounts or large amounts of food that comes from haram, right? Either in itself it is haram, or it is haram, meaning haramun bil asl, or haramun bil arad, meaning that in in essence it is haram, such as eating pork, which is haram to eat because it is najis and Allah prohibits us from eating it. Or, for example, wine or alcohol that is considered to be wine being najis and intoxicating, and alcohol being intoxicating. That in itself, in its essence, is haram for me to consume. But then there's those things that I gain, or that in themselves they're halal, such as a sheep may be halal, but if it's not slaughtered the halal way, right, then what happens? It becomes mayta, and it becomes haram for me to consume, right? So, or it could be that I might use wealth that is not mine. I might, God forbid, steal or embezzle or take the wealth of an orphan, as we saw in the verse of chapter 4, where the person thinks that they are, smart. Of course, they're devious, right? But they don't know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in the Holy Quran, وَيَمْكُرُونَ وَيَمْكُرُ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. They are cunning, but Allah is cunning, and Allah is even more cunning than they can ever be. Meaning Allah would outsmart them. So thinking that, you can get away, God forbid, of course not you as in, you brothers, mashallah, you're all believing mu'mins. But I'm saying that to think that somebody actually thinks that they can get away with eating something that is haram, prohibited, whether by bil asl or bil arad, by taking, for example, the wealth of an orphan, or taking from the poor and feeding themselves or feeding their families, surely they are eating in their bellies fire. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states in chapter 4, verse 10. Then he says, وَأَن تَقْتَصِدَ لَهُ فِي الْحَلَالِ. So first, don't put anything haram in your belly, whatever its source may be. That's number one. Number two, وَأَن تَقْتَصِدَ لَهُ فِي الْحَلَالِ, which means that, yes, feed it from that which Allah has made halal for you to consume, but be economical, right? So don't overfeed it. You see? And we'll talk about that a little. The Holy Prophet ﷺ, he explains what is meant by economical eating. He says, نحن قوم لا نأكل حتى نجوع وإذا أكلنا لا نشبع. We are people that when we eat, we don't eat so that we get hungry. And if we eat, we don't eat to the point where we are full, right? So we are people who do not eat until we become hungry. You know how, because you might wonder, what does that mean? If a person is eating, how can he be hungry from eating? It's basically, the foodie culture, right? Yes, everybody's familiar with it?
Yeah.
So with the foodie culture, what do? First thing they do is they make sure that they go to a place that serves really good food that they can take a good picture of. And they actually search out in the city where they are, and in other cities, right, where the good food spots are. And they go out of their way to go there and to take pictures of the food before they even consume it, right? And when they eat, they're eating so that they can try the next thing that they have on their menu, right? So the Prophet is saying, listen, we don't eat so that we think more of eating and we get hungrier. Like you've seen those food challenges on YouTube, right? Eating 3,000 calories or 5,000 calories all in one sitting, whether it's pizza and burgers and whatever else they might think is delectable, right? So he says, we are not a people that do this, which means it's highly abhorred to Allah for us to be of those types of people who have those kinds of channels, YouTube channels. as well as we shouldn't be of those people who act that way. وَإِذَا أَكَلْنَا لَا نَشْبَعْ. And if we eat, we make sure that there's room in our bellies, that we don't fill our bellies, right? And unfortunately, this is a common error that some parents make because, they grew up that way. In the culture, the first thing that they say to their child when they're eating is, شبعت? Are you full? شبعت? Are you full? No, you're not full yet. Eat some more. أكل بعد. خلص صحنك. Finish your plate. Well, why didn't you finish your plate? Well, maybe because you put too much food for me. No, you have to finish your plate. Otherwise, shaitan will be sitting next to you. Well, shaitan will be sitting next to me if I'm overeating. Agreed? If you agree, say I agree. Right? يا أخويا مو لازم الواحد يكون كريم. We have to be generous. Right? Yes. Generosity is one thing. Right? To do mujamala is part of your deen. Right? To do tawaddud, mujamala meaning to invite people to your home, to invite them to eat, to act generously with them, right? To provide them everything that would please them. That's a great thing to do. That's a very generous thing to do. But to keep forcing them to eat, and if you don't eat, wallah az'al. I swear I will be sad if you don't eat. والله علي الطلاق بالثلاثة if you don't eat. No, I shouldn't be doing this. لا أزعل خلاص والله أزعل منك. I will not talk to you again. I will not invite you over again. Right? This is not, in actual fact, this is contrary to what the Holy Prophet is telling us here. Because, yeah, it's one thing to show generosity, but then to force someone to eat and make them feel bad if they're not eating to the point where they're full, where they're stuffed, where they end up in a food coma, right? This is not, in actual fact, an Islamic thing to do. This is, yes, it's a cultural thing to do, right? But this type of culture is not a good culture. Yes, say, okay, let me put you this, let me put this for you, let me put that for you, but don't over insist to the point where the person feels embarrassed and fearful that they may hurt you, and then they end up overeating, right? And then what are you going to say? You're going to say, look at this guy, he ate so much. And he's going to say, oh my God, I can't breathe, right? They forced me to eat. And nobody likes to be forced to do anything. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala certainly doesn't want us to do that as well. Okay? Yes, do a little mujamala, that's very good. Okay? But don't overdo it. Okay? Just like when you want to eat, eat enough, but don't overdo it. So that when you're done, right? You shouldn't be, how you know you're done is that there's still room in your stomach for more. Okay? Not so that you can fit dessert in it. You got it? Not so that you can fit dessert in it. Rather so that you can breathe. You know how when you overeat, you just can't breathe? You have to open up that belt, right? Maybe pop open a button or two. Am I right or am I wrong? Right? This is actually not from the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we said, what is the sunnah of the Holy Prophet? When we say sunnah, what do we mean by that?
What the Ma'asum did, what he said, what he agreed on.
Ahsant, exactly. What the infallible said, did, or agreed to. Then he says, وَلَا تُخْرِجْهُمْ مِنْ حَدِّ التَّقْوِيَةِ إِلَى حَدِّ التَّهْوِينِ. And don't move it out of a state of being a source of strength for you. Because when your stomach is there to receive the fuel. It's exactly like the gas tank in your car. Right? You pump the gas in, it goes into that container, and then the car uses it for fuel. The goal of food is to be fuel for you, right? So that it can be a source of strength for you, so that you can operate well, so that you can, go about your day well, so you can be strong in your ibadah. But if you overeat, what happens?
Sick?
Yeah, well, your belly doesn't become a place where that's going to just fuel you to be strong, but rather it's going to weaken you. Because think about it. Think about when you overeat and you're in a food coma, right? Do you even feel like getting up for salah? For salah? Huh?
No.
You get lazy, right? Your mom comes and asks you something, your dad comes and asks for something. You're in a food coma. You're not going to get up. Even if you say yes, you're not going to get up for a while. Agreed? If you agree, say I agree.
Right.
So now you moved your stomach from being a source of strength, right, to fuel your energy and your motivation and your drive. Rather, it's become a source of weakness. Why? Because Look, Imam Ali, he says it beautifully. He says, لا إفراط ولا تفريط. Says that a person should not be in a state of extreme deficiency, and he shouldn't be in a state of extremism, where you're just doing too much or you're eating too much. Okay, you need to eat just enough to be able to fuel you. You need room to be able to breathe as well. Otherwise, what's going to happen? You're going to weaken yourself. You'll fall into a food coma, and what'll happen? وذهاب المروة إلى حد التهوين وذهاب المروة. It'll cause you to become weak, right? And you won't be able to function because you're in that food coma. And what'll happen because you're in the food coma? You know that there are certain chores that you need to do, certain acts that you should do, ethical acts that you should do, and yet you don't do them. Right? So if your mother, your mother cooked for you, you ate, and now she comes and she starts picking up stuff, right? And you want to get up and help, but you just can't. You've eaten so much you can't even move. Right? Heck, if you stand on the prayer rug, you've eaten so much, right, that you feel like throwing up. So even chivalrous things where you can help others, you're going to be too lazy to do it. You're going to be weakened because you overate. The Holy Prophet ﷺ, what does he say? He says, لا تميتوا القلوب بكثرة الطعام والشراب. Don't harden your hearts and deaden them by eating too much food and too much drink. فإن القلوب تموت كالزرع إذا كثر عليه الماء. For the hearts die just like a plant if you overwater it. Have any of you ever overwatered the plant?
So many times.
Right? And you know what happens? This wonderful plant you just bought and you care to take care of it, but you think you're taking care of it, but you're like, oh, you put too much water. You didn't find out exactly what its needs are. You just bought it and you just put it on the windowsill. Its leaves started to dry from the hot sun. Apparently, it needs to be kept in a cool, shaded place. Doesn't need sun the entire day. And you overwatered it, so you basically drowned it to the point where it can't breathe, right? And it ends up dying. He says, look, your heart is the same way. Then he continues and he says, وَضَبْطُهُ إِذَا هَمَّ بِالْجُوعِ وَالظَّمَأِ. He says, and controlling it, if it becomes hungry and it becomes thirsty. Prophet Muhammad is reported to have said, sallallahu alayhi wa alayhi, مَا مَلَأَ ابْنُ آدَمَ وِعَاءً شَرًّا مِّن بَطْنِهِ. There isn't a container that mankind fills that is worse than his own stomach. حسب ابن آدم لقيمات يقمن صلبه. All that a human being needs is just a few morsels of food that will strengthen him. فإن كان فاعلا لا محالة. If he has to eat, right, and there's no other option, فثلث لطعامه, then a third of his stomach should contain food. وثلث لشرابه, and a third should be reserved for liquid. وثلث لنفسه, and a third so that he can breathe. You see? فإن الشبع المنتهي بصاحبه إلى التخم. For feeling so full to the point where you end up in a food coma, مكسلة, it causes you to become lazy. ومثبطة, and it basically prevents you from having drive and motivation. ومقطعة عن كل بر وكرم, and it prevents you from, it stands in the way of you doing acts of random voluntary kindness and generosity because you're in a food coma. What are you going to do? How are you going to get up? You can't even get up. Can't even get up to pray. Can't even get up to help your mom or your siblings, right? The Holy Prophet ﷺ is reported to have said, "Man ta'awwada kathrat al-ta'ami wal-sharabi qasa qalbuh." A person who becomes used to habitually eating and drinking all the time, his heart becomes a harsh one, becomes hardened. So overeating, over drinking deadens the heart. وَإِنَّ الرَّيَّ الْمُنْتَهِي بِصَاحِبِهِ إِلَى السُّكْرِ. As for drinking, basically alcohol, because it ends in causing you intoxication, مَسْخَفَةٌ وَمَجْهَلَةٌ وَمَذْهَبَةٌ لِلْمُرُوَّةِ. Okay? Which means what? Which means that it causes one to become a person who is not serious in their lives, people end up just, looking at this person, belittling him. They'll say, this is a silly person, look at how he acts. And it causes a person to fall into ignorance, into ignorant acts. عمل الجهال ومذهبة للمروة and or مذهبة للمروة, and it causes your chivalry to go away, right? It removes one's chivalry. So let's summarize the action items for the stomach. Number one, the Imam said, do not make it a container for little or large amounts of haram. Number two, be economical in your consumption of that which is permissible for you. Number three, it is a place of gaining strength and fuel. Number four, do not make it a place of weakness and lack of chivalry. Number five, control it when it is hungry and thirsty. Number six, being full leads one to laziness, killing your drive and motivation, preventing you from righteous acts and from generosity. And drinking intoxicants, God forbid, debases one's character. It causes one to fall into ignorance and removes one's chivalry. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So now let's look at the right of the privates. وَأَمَّا حَقُّ فَرْجِكَ. As for the right of your privates, meaning your genitals, فَحِفْظُهُ مِمَّا لَا يَحِلُّ لَكَ. For it is to protect it from that which is prohibited for it to do. وَالْإِسْتِعَانَةُ عَلَيْهِ. And to help it, to help yourself, by doing what? بِغَضِّ الْبَصَرِ. By casting your gaze. فَإِنَّهُ مِنْ أَعْوَنِ الْأَعْوَانِ. For it is the greatest of help. وَكَثْرَةُ ذِكْرِ الْمَوْتِ. And to think about death plentifully. Frequently remember death. You might say, oh, that's morbid. No. In Islam, we believe that if you constantly remind yourself of death, and that's why it's mustahab, it's very recommended. You get bonus points if every Thursday or Friday you go visit, the graves, whether you have deceased relatives there or not. You go, you recite Fatiha for them, and this kind of puts you in your place, and you realize, you know what, I'm going to be 6 feet under as well at one point. Inshallah, Allah yatawwal a'markum jami'an. But if I don't, do what pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then and do it soon, then I might end up under the earth without having done any good deeds. And then what will help me? My money? Because my money won't go with me, right? I'm not going to take my money with me. The wealthiest of the wealthy never took their money with them. Look at them in the pyramids, right? They're mummified and they bury their wealth with them, but they didn't take any of it in the afterlife. It's still here. Agreed? So remembering death frequently is something that's important to do because it softens your heart. It prevents you from just falling into materialism and materialistic thoughts. And then he says, وَالتَّهَدُّدِ لِنَفْسِكَ بِاللَّهِ وَالتَّخْوِيفِ لَهَا بِهِ. So here he's telling me, listen, you have to have some self-talk here. You have to talk to yourself and say to it, how dare you? Threaten it, right? Threaten it with Allah, okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, will do this to you. He'll do that to you. He's going to punish you, right? So make sure you have that self-talk. Don't do this. Don't even think about doing this. It displeases Allah. And if Allah is displeased, then He will punish you in the hereafter, right? So that's what he's saying. Talk to yourself that way. وَالتَّخْوِيفِ لَهَا بِهِ. And instill the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within yourself. Then he says, وَبِاللَّهِ الْعَصْمَةُ وَالتَّأْيِيدُ. And it is only with the help and support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we can be protected and supported. وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. And there is no ability or power to do so without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first and foremost. So we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the strength to be able to fulfill these rights. So let's take a look at the action items for the privates then. As for the right of your genitals, he says, number one, protect it from that which is prohibited for it. Number two, help yourself in doing so by doing the following. Cast your gaze, right? Look away. Always remember the saying of Prophet Muhammad, the first look is for you, the next look, the second look, and the others are all against you, right? And that doesn't mean take a good look. Okay, that's not what it means. It means you only get a glance, literally fractions of a second. Once you realize what you're looking at, you have to look away right away. If you're dealing with a girl, if you say, Shaykhna, this is tough to do in the West, I'll tell you, no, it's not tough. Before I became a sheikh, I worked in the corporate world. right? All you have to do is, if you look at them, look away. Look at them, then look away. Spend more time looking away than looking at them. And if they say, "Oh, but this is disrespectful, you should be looking at us in our eyes," okay? Then in that case, glance towards their eyes and glance away, and then explain to them, "Listen, in my religion, out of respect for you, right? And of course, what we mean is so that you don't fall into, haram thoughts, God forbid, right? Because you're protecting yourself as well, and you're respecting that person that's in front of you. This is what my religion tells me to do. So respectfully, I'm doing this because I respect you so much, because I want to dignify you and honor you. So then, number one, protected from that which is prohibited from it. That one's clear. Number two, help yourself in doing so. How? I mean, in protecting it, by casting your gaze first and foremost. That is the greatest help, the Imam says. فَإِنَّهُ أَعْوَنُ الْأَعْوَانِ. Then he says, frequently remember death. Visit the graves once a week. Threaten yourself, your nafs, with Allah. That's next. And then instill the fear of Allah within yourself. By talking to yourself constantly and reminding yourself that this is not something that a believer does, right? And then number three, only with the help of and support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can we be protected and supported. And lastly, there is no ability or power to do so without Allah's support. This is the right of the stomach. If you want to take a snapshot of it, this is all of it with a translation. And this is the right of the privates, if you want to take a snapshot of this one as well. And with that, inshallah, tomorrow we will cover the right of the father and the right of the mother. Now, someone asked in the group regarding Zakat al-Fitra. I know I mentioned this yesterday, right? So yesterday we spoke about Zakat al-Fitra, agreed?
Correct.
Talked that the intention should be to give food to those who are poor. We said that the amount is 3 kg of a staple food. We also said if you want to donate, just go to, you're supposed to donate unless you have a financial difficulty that prevents you from paying your zakat. Your zakat, this zakat al-fitra is wajib. It's obligatory for you to pay unless you're unable to. Okay? So you go to al-ayn.org and then select zakat al-fitra and then put for however many you are responsible for in your household, right? Meaning that they depend on you. Okay, so you're the one that purchases the food and so on for the house. You pay the mortgage or whatever the case may be. You're basically paying the upkeep for these individuals to be able to live, under your roof. Okay, you become the one who's responsible for paying zakat.
All right.
Any questions?
Yes.
Yes, Brother Sajjad.
Everyone here asking Sheikhna,
Yeah.
did they decide tomorrow is Eid inshallah or Mukammil?
No, inshallah, mukammil right now. It's mukammil. So it'll be Monday, inshallah, according to Sayyid Sistani. If we hear anything else, anything that, for those who follow Ayatollah Khou'i, there's a possibility maybe in Alaska, but we haven't heard anything yet. If I hear anything, I will let you know. Otherwise, it's شهر يكون يعني متمم للعدة إن شاء الله, meaning the completion of the 30 days, and Monday, inshallah, will be Eid so far. That's how it looks. But we'll see if we hear anything from the West Coast, because in the West Coast right now, there's a 3 hour difference between us and them. So it's 11 here, or for you, it's 10. So for them, it's minus 2 hours, which means that it's 8 o'clock. Okay.
Sure.
So they should have seen by now. All right. But the reports, if they were to see, but the reports are going to come in and see. And of course, Alaska is on the West Coast, right?
So,
Okay. All right then. So inshallah, anybody have any other questions?
Nizar asking, what is after the second series?
Series 3. Series 3 is the series on practical ethics. This is where, from the Holy Quran, this is where we cover the chapter of Al-Hujurat, and we learn what Allah tells us a believer does not do. Because in order for you to know, what to do, the most important thing first is to know what to stay away from. Agreed? So this is what Allah teaches us in Surah Al-Hujurat. Inshallah, today we were on lesson, I believe, 12. Tomorrow, inshallah, we'll be on lesson 13. And we only have, I believe, one more lesson after this, after 13. and that's the completion of the 14 letters. So tomorrow we'll do the right of the father and the mother, and then inshallah the last class. Of course, we'll break for Eid inshallah, but then the next day or the day after we'll agree. We'll message back and forth and agree which day. From that point on, we'll start a weekly class. It won't be a daily class. Okay. And then we'll finish this one off with one more class. We've got the right of the father and the mother, and then we've got the right of the sibling and the companion. But because there are some fathers here as well, I would like to, inshallah, also do the right of the child, because I believe that's really important as well. Whether we have parents now or, inshallah, people some of you who will get married and have kids, it's better for you to know this from now. Then later on, after you have kids, you say, why didn't anybody tell me? Agreed?
Correct.
Okay. All right. هذا والحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين والفاتحة على أرواح المرحومين مسبوقة مشفوعة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد.
اللهم صل على محمد. أحسنتم شيخ، جزاكم الله
الله
خير.
عليكم.
ذلك والدعاء.
سلامنا للوالد
يا سلام ورحمة الله
والمتعلقين.
وبركاته. عليكم
حياكم
السلام.
الله.
نسألكم الدعاء.
الله وياكم. يا هلا، مع السلامة. مع
مع
السلامة.
الجميع.